4 widows showed up at his gate in one morning, and he turned every single one away. But the woman he couldn't forget was the one kneeling in a back alley, bleeding from her knuckles, splinting a dying cat with strips torn from her own skirt. They called her cursed. They threw rocks at her in the street. Her husband was hanged for stealing horses from the same man who held their debt. And the secret she's been carrying for 4 years is about to burn this whole town to the ground. Welcome to Cowboy Dusk, where the dust settles and the real stories begin. This is a place for tales of the untamed West, love born not from first sight but from shared scars, the quiet strength of those the world threw away, and the stubborn, aching courage it takes to choose mercy over vengeance. If stories like these make your heart beat a little harder, you're home. This story teaches us that silence can cost more than any words ever will, and that healing doesn't mean forgetting your wounds. It means deciding to keep going, despite them. Sometimes the most broken hands are the ones that know best how to hold someone together. If this story moved you, let me know. Hit that like button and leave a comment telling me which moment stayed with you the longest. Share this with someone who needs to hear it tonight, and subscribe to Cowboy Dusk so you're here when the next story rides in. I'll see you at sundown.
Dusty Creek, Texas. July 1883. Caleb Mercer counted 4 buggies parked outside his gate and knew today was going to be a bad day. He had been up since before dawn, him and his foreman Thomas dragging a wounded cow out of a rock crevice on the south ridge. The rope burned his palms raw. The cow bellowed loud enough to wake the dead in 3 counties. Blood on limestone. The July sun already brutal at 7 in the morning, turning the air into something you could chew. Caleb handled it the way he handled everything. Cold, efficient, no wasted motion. He got the cow out, set the leg, packed the wound with carbolic acid and clean linen. But the calf did not make it. It lay on its side in the dust, ribs still, eyes going glassy in the heat. Caleb stood over that small body longer than he should have, staring at nothing, seeing things that were not there. Thomas watched from 10 feet away but said nothing. This was not new. They rode back to the main house in silence, the kind of silence that fills up a space between 2 men who have worked together 8 years and know when to leave each other alone. Thomas was 55 years old, Mexican-born, quiet as a stone wall and twice as solid. His wife, Consuelo, had died in the fever of 74. He stayed on the ranch because, as he once told Caleb, cows do not grieve. Makes them easy company. The 4 buggies sat in the yard like an ambush. Caleb pulled up his horse and stared. 4 women, 4 widows from Dusty Creek, each one dressed in her Sunday best on a Wednesday morning. Each one sitting straight-backed in her buggy with her hands folded and her best smile ready. He knew exactly what this was. Rose Beaumont had been at it again. Rose was the daughter of Judge Walter Beaumont, who owned the bank and half the town and most of the law in Dusty Creek. Rose had decided 2 years ago that Caleb Mercer was going to marry her, not because she loved him, because his ranch was the biggest operation in West Texas, and her father's bank was bleeding money, and a strategic marriage was the only thing standing between the Beaumont family and ruin. But Rose was smart. She did not come at Caleb directly. She sent other women first, acceptable candidates, widows of good standing, women who would make Caleb look at the options and conclude that if he had to marry someone, it might as well be the prettiest and most connected woman in town. Caleb received each one on the porch. He did not invite them inside. The first was Margaret Hensley, wealthy, owned 200 acres east of town. She talked about merging properties and shared water rights, and how 2 ranches together would be stronger than one apart. She talked for 90 seconds. Caleb thanked her and said no. The second was Delia Parks, pretty, young for a widow, maybe 30. She touched his arm while she talked, and her fingers found the ridge of scar tissue under his sleeve, and she flinched. She pulled her hand back like she had touched a hot stove. She tried to cover it with a smile, but the damage was done. The third was Opal Whitmore, practical as a fence post. She listed her domestic skills like reading a bill of sale. Can cook, can sew, can keep books, can manage a household of 12. Caleb listened, thanked her, said no. The fourth was Ruth Ann Colby. She looked at him with soft brown eyes and said, "You must be so lonely out here all by yourself." He said no before she finished the sentence. Each time a woman looked at him with expectation, with need, with that particular hope that says, "I am trusting you with my future." Caleb felt something cold move through his chest. Not anger, not discomfort, fear. Because every time someone depended on him, he saw Jesse Colt's face. Jesse had been 17 years old, a private in the 4th Texas Infantry. Captured same as Caleb at Lookout Mountain, held in the same Union prison camp near Indianapolis. Jesse had lied about his age to enlist. He had freckles and a laugh that could fill a room, and he called Caleb his sergeant even after they were prisoners, and rank did not matter anymore. The fire came in the winter of 1864. It swept through the camp at night. 23 men died. Caleb had 3 seconds to choose. Lieutenant Harwell was trapped under a fallen beam on his left. Jesse was trapped under another beam on his right. 3 seconds. 2 men screaming. Caleb chose Harwell. Dragged him out. Got burned doing it. Left arm, left ribs, part of his neck. The scars were still there 20 years later, ridged and shiny under his sleeve. Harwell died 2 days later. Smoke damage to his lungs. Jesse died in the fire. Caleb chose wrong. He had known it for 20 years. And every time someone looked at him like they were counting on him, he saw that boy's face through the flames. After the last buggy rolled away down the road, Thomas leaned against the porch railing and spat tobacco juice into the dust. "Patron. 4 women in 1 month. Town is going to say you either hate women or you have lost your mind. Let them talk. Cattle cannot cook, patron." Caleb ignored him and went inside. Late afternoon, he rode to town. Needed veterinary supplies from the general store. Carbolic acid, clean linen, copper sulfate for the water troughs. The usual. He tied his horse outside Finch's general store and walked down the boardwalk. The heat was coming off the dirt street in waves. Nobody was out who did not have to be. He passed the alley behind the store and stopped. A woman was kneeling in the dirt, thin. So thin her collarbones showed through her dress like fence rails under canvas. She had both hands working on something small. A cat. An injured cat with a broken leg, mewling and twisting. The woman was splinting the leg with 2 sticks and a strip of cloth she had torn from the hem of her own skirt. She was murmuring to the animal in low Spanish. Soft words, patient words. Her hands were bloody, not the cat's blood, hers. Someone had thrown rocks at her. He could see the wounds on her knuckles, the swelling on the back of her right hand. Fresh. She had not cleaned them. She had not bandaged them. She had gone straight from being stoned to saving a cat. She did not look up. She did not know he was standing there. Caleb watched her hands. Steady, precise, certain. Those hands knew what they were doing. Those hands had done this before many times. She was not guessing. She was working from knowledge passed down and practiced and trusted. Those hands know how to keep something alive, he thought. And then something else hit him. Something that made his stomach drop like he had missed a step on a staircase. He knew this woman, not from today, not from this alley, from 4 years ago, a courtroom, right here in Dusty Creek. He'd been buying horses from the Beaumont stable that week. Sat in the back of the courtroom because there was nothing else to do while he waited for the sale to finalize. A man named Thomas Thornton was being sentenced for horse theft. Caleb remembered the woman in the front row. The way her face went white when the judge read the sentence. The way she collapsed. The way her hands reached out and grabbed the bench in front of her like she was trying to hold on to the earth itself. He walked out, bought his horses, rode home. He had told himself 100 times that it was not his business, that he did not know the woman or her husband, that the law was the law. Standing in that alley now, watching her bloody hands work with a gentleness he had not seen in years, Caleb Mercer realized he had been lying to himself for 4 years, and he was not sure he could stop. Eliza Thornton knew exactly how many days she had before she starved to death. 11, maybe 12 if she drank enough water. She had done the math 3 times. She always did the math. That was how she survived, not with hope, not with prayer, with arithmetic. How many biscuits left? How many pennies in the tin? How many days until the body starts eating itself? 11 days, give or take. She had not always been this person. There was a time, 4 years and a lifetime ago, when she had been a wife, when she had a house with a real bed and a stove that worked, and a man who smiled at her across the breakfast table like she was the best thing he had ever seen. Thomas. She could still hear his voice on the night everything ended, sitting on the edge of their bed in the dark, his hat already on, his boots already laced. I have to do this, Eliza. Beaumont's bank is calling in the loan. Your mama needs that doctor in San Antonio. The medicine is not enough anymore. I can get 3 horses from the stable, sell them across the border. Nobody will know. She had begged him, gotten on her knees and grabbed his hands and begged, "Please do not do this. We will find another way. There is always another way." He kissed her forehead, pulled his hands free, walked out the door. She lay in the dark and listened to hoofbeats fading south. And she did nothing. She did not go to the sheriff. She did not run after him. She did not do the one thing that might have saved his life. Thomas was caught before dawn, tried in 3 days, hanged in a week, and Eliza Thornton became the cursed widow of Dusty Creek. That was 4 years ago. Now she woke every morning in a room behind the livery stable that was smaller than a horse stall. The plank wall between her and the horses was thin enough to hear them breathe. The smell of manure seeped through the cracks. Mice ran across the floor at night. She had stopped flinching at them months ago. Breakfast was water from the pump and half a stale biscuit she had been saving for 2 days. She ate slowly, not because she was savoring it, but because eating slowly made the food last longer in her stomach, tricked the body into thinking there was more. She did not eat the other half. She put it back in the tin. She would need it worse tomorrow. This was not just poverty. She knew that somewhere in the part of her mind she did not let herself visit often. She was punishing herself, rationing food not just because she was poor, but because some deep, unexamined part of her believed she did not deserve more. Thomas was dead because she did nothing. Therefore, she deserved nothing. It was a clean kind of logic. It was also killing her. She walked to Mrs. Crawford's house on the north end of town. Laundry work. 2 bits for a full day of washing and wringing and hanging. It was the last household in Dusty Creek willing to hire her. Mrs. Crawford opened the door, looked at Eliza, looked at the ground. "My husband says I cannot hire you anymore. I am sorry." No explanation, no argument would change it. Eliza nodded, walked away, did not cry. She calculated instead. That was the last household. She was now out of options entirely. The children found her on Main Street. 3 boys, the oldest maybe 12. They did not even bother to hide. They stood in the middle of the road and threw rocks the way boys throw rocks at stray dogs. Casually, without malice. Just something to do on a hot afternoon. One hit her shoulder blade. Bruise. Not fracture. Keep walking. One hit her knuckles. She heard the skin split. Blood came fast and hot. She flexed her fingers. Nothing broken. "Keep walking." "Cursed widow," the oldest boy yelled. "My pa says your husband died because of you." She kept walking. This was routine. She had been stoned before. She would be stoned again. The trick was not to react. Reacting made it worse. Reacting made it a story they would tell their friends. If she just kept walking, she was boring. Boring was safe. She found the cat in the alley behind the general store. Gray tabby. Someone had kicked it or stepped on it. The back left leg was broken clean. The animal was panting, eyes wild with pain. Eliza knelt in the dirt and went to work. She tore a strip from her skirt, used 2 sticks from the woodpile behind the store, splinted the leg the way her mother had taught her to splint anything. Straight sticks, firm wrapping, not too tight. Talk to the animal while you work. Low voice, Spanish words. They do not understand the words, but they understand the sound. Her mother had been a curandera, a healer. Tejana born, raised on the border, trained by her own mother before her. Eliza grew up grinding herbs in a stone mortar, setting bones, making poultices from chaparral root and sage and mesquite bark. She could treat a wound on a cow as easy as on a person. These were skills that had value, real value. Nobody in Dusty Creek cared. She was the cursed widow. That was all she was. She heard a footstep behind her while she worked. Heavy, deliberate. A man's step. She did not look up. Men in alleys were not usually bringing good news for women like her. The footstep stopped. Silence. Then it moved away. She finished the splint and carried the cat to the shady side of the building where there was a dish of water left out for strays. She set the animal down gently and straightened up and looked at the blood on her hands. Her blood, not the cat's. She had not even thought to clean her own wounds first. That was habit too. She went into the general store. She needed a needle and thread, one needle and one spool of white thread. That was the last purchase she could afford. 37 cents. After that, the tin was empty. Harold Finch stood behind the counter and did not look at her. He never looked at her. He served her the way you serve someone you wish would stop coming in. Rose Beaumont was there. Rose stood near the fabric bolts with two other women. She wore a dress the color of a summer sky, her golden hair pinned up perfectly, her face composed in an expression of gentle concern that Eliza recognized immediately. That was Rose's killing face, the face she wore when she was about to be cruel in a way that looked like kindness. Rose did not speak to Eliza. She did not need to. She spoke about her. Somebody ought to tell that poor woman about the poorhouse in El Paso. Rose's voice carried across the store like it was designed to. Staying here just hurts her more. She has no people, no prospects, no future in this town. It would be a mercy, really. Bless her heart. The two women with Rose nodded sympathetically. Harold Finch studied his countertop. Eliza's jaw tightened. Words rose in her throat like bile. 4 years of words she had never spoken. But she swallowed them. Because if she talked back to Rose Beaumont, Harold would stop selling to her. And this was the last store in town. She paid for her needle and thread. Walked out. On the boardwalk, a man stepped into her path. Not a tall man. Not a clean man. Dirty clothes, whiskey smell so strong it preceded him by 3 feet, a grin that showed 2 missing teeth. "You are Thomas Thornton's wife, ain't you? Name is Silas Drummond." He swayed slightly, steadied himself on the porch post. "I got something to tell you. About your husband. About the night he got caught." Eliza stopped. "Your husband did not steal those horses alone," Silas said. "There was a second man, and that man is still walking free right here in Dusty Creek." Caleb Mercer had not slept more than 3 hours straight in 20 years, and most nights he was grateful for even that. 3 in the morning. The porch of the main house. A cup of coffee gone cold in his hand. The ranch spread out before him in the darkness, all sound and no sight. Cattle lowing on the far hills. A horse stamping in the corral. Coyotes yipping on the eastern ridge, their voices thin and wild in the night air. He was not admiring anything. He was running inventory. Fence lines along the south ridge needed repair. Water level in the east tank was dropping. Head count was off by 23. 23 cattle missing in the last month. Not dead, not wandered. Driven off. Someone was stealing from him. Control. That was what the ranch was. Not a business, not a legacy. A system of control. Every fence in the right place. Every animal accounted for. Every man doing his job. If he could keep it all running, keep it all ordered, then nothing went wrong. Nobody got hurt. Nobody died on his watch. It was the same thing he had tried to do in the army, the same thing he had failed at in the prison camp. But here on this land with these cattle, he was the only authority. He answered to nobody. And if he could just maintain control, everything would be fine. The coffee was cold, but he drank it anyway. Cold coffee was still coffee. Waste nothing. Control everything. Morning came hard and bright. Thomas rode in from the east pasture before the sun cleared the ridge. His face was grim. Another 8-head gone, patron. Found the tracks heading south toward the border. Whoever is doing this knows the land. Caleb's hand closed into a fist. He hit the top rail of the corral fence hard enough to split the skin on his knuckles. Blood welled up and dripped onto the cedar post. Thomas watched him the way he always watched him. Steady, patient, unimpressed. You are commanding a regiment, patron. This is a ranch. If I find the man taking my cattle, it will be a war. Tomas said nothing to that. He had learned a long time ago which arguments were worth having and which were just weather. Caleb saddled his horse and rode to town. He needed veterinary supplies. He also wanted a word with Sheriff Dawson about the missing cattle, though he expected nothing useful. Dawson was Judge Beaumont's man, always had been. The law in Dusty Creek ran through the bank before it ran through the courthouse. He found himself steering past the alley behind the general store. The woman was not there today. The dish of water was still by the wall. The cat was gone. Inside the store, Harold Finch went pale when Caleb asked about her. The woman in the alley. Yesterday. Thin, dark hair. Who is she? Harold polished the same spot on the counter 3 times before answering. Stay clear of her, Mr. Mercer. That is the Thornton widow, Eliza Thornton. Her husband was Thomas Thornton, the one who got hanged for stealing Judge Beaumont's horses 4 years back. She is cursed. Bad luck follows her everywhere she goes. Every person who gets close to her ends up regretting it. Caleb watched Harold's face while he talked. The man was not being cruel, he was scared. Was genuinely scared. Not of Eliza, of whoever had told him to say these things. Has somebody warned you about her, Harold? Harold's eyes flickered to the left, toward the bank across the street, then back to Caleb. I am just telling you what everybody knows, Mr. Mercer. Caleb bought his supplies and left without pressing further, but he filed it away the way he filed everything away, sorted it, catalogued it. Another piece of information in the ledger he kept in his head. On the road home, his horse almost stepped on her. She was sitting by the side of the road about half a mile outside of town. Not on a rock or a log. On the bare ground. Knees drawn up. Eyes fixed on something in the middle distance. Nothing there to look at but empty scrubland, and beyond it the brown ribbon of the creek winding south toward the Pecos River. She was not resting. He could see that in her posture. The way her body leaned forward slightly. The way her hands lay open and empty in her lap. Like she had set something down and was deciding whether to pick it up again. He pulled up his horse. She did not look at him. Your hand needs wrapping. Now she looked. Gray-blue eyes, sharp, wary. The eyes of a woman who had learned that attention from strangers usually meant pain. My hand is not your concern. I saw you splint that cat yesterday. Good work. Silence. Long enough for the horse to shift its weight and stamp at a fly. It died, she said flatly. Last night. Too late. Something shifted inside Caleb. Not attraction. The woman was half-starved, covered in dust, bleeding from her knuckles, sitting by the side of the road with nothing and nobody. There was nothing romantic about any of it. What he felt was recognition. He was looking at a person who was losing a slow war, not with guns or fire, but with the steady, grinding weight of being alone and unwanted and discarded. He had fought that same war after the prison camp. After the burns healed and the nightmares started, and he came to Texas because nobody knew him here and he could be alone without anyone watching. Nobody had helped him then. Nobody even tried. He rode on 10 paces, stopped, sat there in the saddle with the sun beating down on his hat, and the horse flicking its ears at the flies. Then he turned around. I have got a mare with a bad hind leg, barbed wire cut, going septic. I need somebody who knows wound care every day, morning and evening. Cash wages, room and board, 1 week trial. She studied him for a long time. He felt those gray-blue eyes take him apart piece by piece the way a person examines a horse they are thinking of buying, checking for soundness, looking for the hidden flaw. What is wrong with her leg exactly? Barbed wire laceration, deep, about 4 inches. Been treating it with carbolic acid for a week, but it is not improving. Stop using the carbolic acid. She said it with the flat certainty of someone who knows what she's talking about. I need chaparral root and clean linen. And I need to see the wound before dark. That was the first time in 4 years anyone had spoken to Caleb Mercer like he did not know what he was doing. He found, to his genuine surprise, that he did not mind. They rode back to the ranch in silence, Caleb on his horse, Eliza walking alongside because there was only one horse and he did not know her well enough to offer, and she did not know him well enough to accept. But as they walked, she looked down at her own hands, the bloody knuckles, the torn skin. She was not thinking about the ranch or the mare or the man on the horse ahead of her. She was thinking about what Silas Drummond had told her outside the general store. Your husband did not steal those horses alone. There was a second man, and that man is still walking free in Dusty Creek. She had asked Silas who the second man was. Silas had shaken his head. He was too drunk to be reliable, too bitter to be trusted, but the way he said it, the certainty in his voice. She had lived with a liar for the last 2 years of her marriage, watching Thomas practice his easy smile in the mirror, and she had learned to hear the difference between a man who is making something up and a man who is telling you something that has been eating him alive. Silas Drummond was telling the truth. The question was what she was going to do about it. The Mercer Ranch was bigger than anything Eliza had ever seen, and she hated it immediately. Not the land. The land was beautiful in that hard Texas way, all brown grass and blue sky and ridge lines that went on forever. She hated the order of it. Every fence line straight, every gate oiled, every tool hanging in its place in the barn, the bunkhouse clean as a barracks, the main house spare and functional, not a single thing in it that did not serve a purpose. It looked like a man trying to hold the world still through sheer force of will. Tomas showed her to her quarters. Not a cabin, not a room in the main house, a corner of the grain shed on the far side of the yard, a straw mattress on a plank platform, a canvas divider nailed to the rafters for privacy, a bucket of water, and a tin cup. This is where you sleep, Tomas said. He had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. Supper is at 6 in the main house. Do not be late. He does not like late. Eliza set her bundle on the mattress. The bundle was everything she owned: a change of underclothes, a comb missing 3 teeth, a Bible with her mother's name written inside the cover, a leather pouch of dried herbs. She had slept worse than this. She had slept on bare ground behind the livery stable with nothing between her and the sky. A grain shed with a roof and walls and a mattress was a luxury. She went to see the mare. The horse was in a separate stall at the end of the barn, away from the others, a chestnut mare with a white blaze on her forehead. Pretty animal. Good lines. But the left hind leg was bad. Eliza crouched and examined the wound while the horse shifted nervously above her. The barbed wire had cut deep, almost to the bone in one spot. The edges were red and swollen, hot to the touch. The carbolic acid Caleb had been using was keeping the surface clean, but it was also killing the new tissue trying to grow underneath. The infection was not on the surface. It was deeper, trapped under a layer of chemical burn. She knew what to do. She had known since she was 12 years old, watching her mother treat a mule with the same kind of wound on the Esperanza Ranch outside of Laredo. She needed chaparral root, fresh if possible, dried if not, clean linen, a sharp knife to debride the dead tissue, warm water, and time. She found the chaparral growing wild along the creek bed behind the barn, pulled up 3 plants by the root, stripped the bark, and boiled it over a small fire until the water turned dark brown and smelled like the desert after rain. She strained it through clean cloth and let it cool. Then she went to work on the mare's leg. The horse fought her, tried to kick, tried to pull away. Eliza talked to her in low Spanish the way her mother had taught her. Not commands. Conversation. You are frightened, and that is reasonable. This will hurt, but I am going to help you. Be still now. Be still. Tomas had come to watch. He leaned on the fence with his arms folded and his hat pushed back, observing with the quiet attention of a man who knows animals. Curandera? He asked when she began applying the chaparral wash. Curandera's daughter. My mother was Tejana. Something changed in Tomas's face, a softening, a recognition of kinship. He nodded once and said nothing more. But from that moment, Eliza felt a shift. She had an ally on this ranch. One person who saw her not as the cursed widow, but as a healer's daughter. The cowboys were a different story. There were 6 of them. Red-headed man they called Pete. A quiet one named Miguel. 2 brothers named Dan and Tom Wheeler. Young Billy Lancaster, 17 years old with ears that stuck out and a grin that never quit. And Hank Coulter. Hank was the teamster, drove the wagon, handled supply runs. He had been with Caleb for years, and he carried himself with the easy confidence of a man who knows he is trusted. He was also, from the first moment Eliza walked onto the ranch, her enemy. He did not say anything directly. That was not his way. Instead, he gave her a water bucket, with a dead mouse floating in it. Forgot to set aside her portion at supper, so she had to eat cold leftovers standing in the kitchen after everyone else was done. Left the grain shed door open at night so the wind blew through and scattered her few belongings across the floor. Small things, deniable things. The kind of cruelty that a person in power can always explain away as accident or oversight. Eliza did not react. She had been treated worse by people with better imaginations. She simply noted each small cruelty, filed it away, and said nothing. She was so accustomed to mistreatment that she accepted it the way she accepted weather. It rained. The wind blew. People were unkind. These were facts of her world. And that acceptance, that flat, unsurprised tolerance of abuse, was the most frightening thing about her. By the 3rd day, the mare was not improving. The infection was deeper than Eliza had estimated. She sat up all night in the barn, changing poultices every hour, checking the temperature of the wound with the back of her hand, talking to the horse in the dark. By dawn, the leg was worse. The swelling had spread above the knee. The mare would not put weight on it. Eliza sat on a hay bale and stared at the wall. She was going to be sent away. 1-week trial, Caleb had said. The week was not even half over, and the mare was getting worse, not better. He would cut his losses, thank her politely, send her back to Dusty Creek and the livery stable and the 11 days of starvation she had calculated with cold precision. She packed her bundle. The same bundle she had arrived with, set it on the grain shed floor, and sat beside it, ready to leave before she could be told to leave. Better to go on your own terms. Better to walk out than be thrown out. A sound at the door made her look up. Billy Lancaster stood in the opening with a calf in his arms. The animal was limp, its head hanging. Billy's face was white under his freckles. "Ma'am, this one will not eat, will not stand. Boss said to put it down, but I cannot do it." He looked at her with eyes that were begging. "Please." Eliza looked at the calf, looked at her packed bundle, looked at Billy. She unpacked the bundle. She worked on the calf for 6 hours. It was scours, bad ones. The animal was dehydrated and burning with fever. She brewed a tea from dried prickly pear and mesquite bark, something her mother used to call the desert's own medicine. She fed it to the calf with a rag soaked in the warm liquid, holding the animal's head in her lap while Billy sat across from her and kept the legs still. By noon, the calf was drinking on its own. By evening, it was standing. Billy looked at Eliza like she had performed a resurrection. "How did you do that?" "My mother taught me. Can you teach me?" Eliza almost smiled. Almost. She had not smiled in so long that the muscles felt strange. Maybe. The next morning, the mare's leg finally showed improvement. The chaparral was working, just slowly. The deeper infection was draining, the swelling reducing, the new tissue starting to grow. It would take weeks, not days, but it was working. Eliza did not leave. She stayed because the mare needed her. She stayed because Billy's calf needed her. She stayed because for the first time in 4 years, something in her life was getting better instead of worse. That night, she found a wool blanket draped over the grain shed railing. It had not been there that morning. It smelled like the main house, like wood smoke and coffee and something else she could not name. Something warm. She looked toward the porch. Caleb was sitting in his chair with a cup of coffee, staring out at the dark, not looking at her. She did not say anything about the blanket. He did not say anything about the blanket. She used it that night and slept warmer than she had in months. It was 2 in the morning when she heard the footsteps. She was a light sleeper. 4 years of living in places where you could be robbed or worse had trained her to wake at the smallest sound. She lay still on her mattress, eyes open, listening. Footsteps, careful ones, moving past the grain shed toward the south side of the barn. Then the soft nicker of horses. Then footsteps again, moving away, south toward the border. Eliza got up and pressed her eye to a gap between the boards. Hank Coulter, leading 2 saddled horses south into the darkness. Moving quiet. Moving purposeful. Moving like a man who had done this many times before and knew exactly where he was going. The missing cattle. 23 head in the last month. Not coyotes, not border rustlers. An inside man. Caleb's own trusted teamster, stealing him blind right under his nose. Eliza lay back down on her mattress. Her heart was hammering, her mouth was dry. She knew what she was looking at. She knew what it meant. And she knew what she had to do. The last time she knew the truth and stayed silent. Her husband was hanged. Caleb woke to the smell of smoke, and for 3 full seconds, he was not in Texas. He was in the prison camp. Winter of 1864. The barracks on fire, men screaming, Jesse Colt screaming his name. "Caleb, help me! Caleb, please, I cannot move. The beam has got my legs. Caleb, please!" He ran toward the sound. The heat was a wall. The smoke was a living thing that filled his lungs and blinded his eyes and pressed against his skin like a giant hand. He found Jesse through the flames. The boy's face was white. His eyes were wide. His hand was reaching out. Caleb grabbed the hand, pulled. Jesse's skin came off his wrist like a wet glove. He woke up, sitting straight up in bed, soaked in sweat, hands shaking, heart slamming against his ribs like an animal trying to break out of a cage. 3rd time this week. He got up, dressed in the dark, went to the porch and stood there until his hands stopped shaking. The night was warm and still, a billion stars overhead, the smell of sage on the wind, not smoke. Sage. He breathed it in until his heart slowed. Then he went to work. Dawn found him at the corral fence, watching Eliza work on the mare. She was already up, had been for at least an hour by the look of things. The chaparral wash was warming over a small fire. Clean linen strips were laid out on the fence rail. She knelt by the mare's hind leg, unwrapping yesterday's poultice with careful fingers, examining the wound with the focused attention of a surgeon. She talked to the horse while she worked. Low Spanish. Soft words he could not quite hear. The mare stood still for her. Did not fight. Did not flinch. Something about Eliza's hands, the way they moved, the certainty in them, calmed the animal in a way that carbolic acid and force never had. Caleb watched from a distance and noticed something else. She had changed her own bandages, too, the ones on her knuckles from the rock wounds. She had done it with the same clinical detachment she used on the horse. Unwrap, clean, rewrap, quick, efficient, like her own pain was a chore to be handled, not a thing to be felt. He recognized that. He lived inside it. He walked past the small marker behind the main house on his way to the barn. A wooden cross he had carved himself. No name on it, just 2 initials, J.C. and the year 1864. He stood there a moment the way he always did, then walked away. Later that afternoon, coming back from checking the fence line on the south ridge, Eliza stopped by the marker. She had seen it before. She had not asked about it. She did not ask now. But the next morning, Caleb found a sprig of wild sage laid across the base of the cross. He looked toward the grain shed. Eliza was working on the mare, not looking at him. She had not mentioned it. She would not mention it. Something cracked in his chest. Not open. Not yet. But a fissure, the first one in 20 years. The crack widened that evening when Eliza came to find him. He was in the barn, replacing a broken hinge on the feed-room door. She stood in the doorway with the late sun behind her, her thin frame sharp against the light, and said it flat and plain. I saw Hank leading horses out at 2 in the morning, headed south. Caleb put down his hammer, slowly. You are accusing one of my men. I am telling you what I saw. Last time I kept quiet about something I knew. My husband died for it. The words hit him harder than she probably intended. He looked at her face. She was not angry. She was not pleading. She was terrified. But she was saying it anyway, because she had learned what silence costs. He did not believe her immediately. He wanted to. But trust was not a thing Caleb Mercer gave easily. He had trusted Hank for years. He had trusted the Army. He had trusted himself to save Jesse Colt. Trust had a way of burning down on him. For one brief, shameful moment, he wondered if Eliza was lying. If she was trying to sow division on the ranch. If this was some kind of scheme he could not see yet. He pushed that thought down. Not because it was impossible, but because it was the kind of thinking that had turned him into a man who lived alone on a ranch with 6 cowboys and a foreman and nobody else. I will handle it, he said. He did not tell her what he was going to do. He did not tell anyone. That night, after supper, he sat with Tomas on the porch and laid out a plan in low tones. Mark the cattle. Set a watch rotation. Say nothing to Hank. See what happens. The next afternoon, he found Eliza sitting on the grain shed steps, rebandaging her own hand. The rock wounds were healing, but slowly. She wrapped the linen around her knuckles with one hand and her teeth, pulling the knot tight with a practiced jerk of her head. He sat down beside her without asking permission, took the bandage from her hand without asking either, unwrapped what she had done and rewrapped it properly. Snug, but not tight. Clean edges, neat knot. Their hands were side by side for a moment. His scarred from fire, the skin ridged and shiny from wrist to elbow. Hers torn from rocks, the knuckles swollen and scabbed. 2 different kinds of damage, same result. Neither of them commented on it. But the audience would see it. The hands that told their stories better than words ever could. You do not take care of yourself, he said. Got more important things to worry about. Nothing is more important than staying alive. She looked at him. Those gray-blue eyes, sharp as glass. You really believe that? He did not answer. Because he was not sure he did. That night, the trap sprung. Caleb and Thomas waited in the shadow of the barn, wrapped in dark blankets, rifles across their knees. The moon was a sliver. The stars were bright, but not bright enough to see clearly. They waited. At 2:15 in the morning, Hank Coulter led 5 head of cattle out through the south gate. He had a second horse saddled and loaded with supplies for a multi-day trip. He moved with the confidence of a man who had done this dozens of times. He was not worried about being caught. He had never been caught before. Until now. Caleb stepped out of the shadows. Tomas came around the other side. They had him boxed in. Nowhere to go. Hank saw them. Froze for 1 second. Then did something Caleb did not expect. He laughed. Well now, Hank said, took you long enough. Dismount, Caleb said. His voice was ice. Hank swung down from the saddle easy as you please. Still grinning, the grin of a man who has one more card to play. You think I am the only one? Hank looked from Caleb to Thomas and back. You think this is just me working alone? He shook his head. Ask your little widow, Mercer. She knows more than she is telling you. Eliza knew the instant Caleb looked at her with that expression, the expression of a man who has just been betrayed, that she was going to lose this place, the same way she had lost every other place. It was morning, dawn barely cracking the horizon. Caleb had come to the grain shed, not the barn, not the main house. He came to where she slept and stood in the doorway with a face like carved stone. Hank talked, he said. Eliza sat on the edge of her mattress. She could feel it coming. The way you can feel a storm before the first drop falls. Your husband did not steal those horses alone, Caleb said. Hank was with him. Hank was the second man. They planned it together. When Thomas got caught, Hank ran. Beaumont knew about Hank but let him walk free because Hank agreed to be Beaumont's eyes inside this ranch. Watching me, reporting back. Eliza's hands were folded in her lap. She looked at them. Those healing knuckles. The needle calluses on her fingertips. Hands that knew how to fix things. Hands that could not fix this. Hank says you knew, Caleb continued. He says Thomas told you there was a second man. He says Thomas told you Hank's name. Eliza closed her eyes. Thomas told me there was someone helping him. She spoke slowly, carefully, the way you handle something breakable. He did not tell me a name. He just said someone would be with him, someone who knew the stable. But you knew he was going to steal those horses. Yes, before it happened. You knew the night before. Yes, you did not go to the sheriff. No, you did not stop him. I begged him not to go. He went anyway. And you did not tell anyone. You let it happen. Eliza opened her eyes. The truth was an ugly thing, but she was done hiding from it. Every day for 4 years I have thought about that night. Every single day. If I had gone to the sheriff, Thomas would have been arrested. Maybe spent a year in jail, but he would be alive. She paused. I did not tell you when you hired me because I was ashamed. Because I carry this, and I will always carry it. Caleb stared at her. She could see the war behind his eyes. The part of him that had started to trust her fighting against the part that trusted nothing and nobody. She could see which side was winning. I need you to leave, he said. Not angry. Worse than angry. Controlled. That iron control he used to hold everything together. He was not sending her away because she had lied. He was sending her away because she had cracked his control. She had gotten close enough to damage him. And that was the one thing Caleb Mercer could not allow. Eliza stood up, picked up her bundle, the same bundle, the comb, the Bible, the herbs. She had known this moment would come. She had prepared for it the same way she prepared for everything, with arithmetic, calculating the distance back to town, calculating the days left before she starved. I understand, she said. She walked past him. Out of the grain shed, across the yard, past the barn where the mare was healing, past the corral where Billy's calf was standing on wobbly legs eating from a bucket. Dishy. Past all the things she had fixed in a week. She did not look back, but she did not walk toward the river. For 4 years, every time something went wrong, every time the world pushed her down, she had thought about the river, the deep part south of town where the current was strong, the part where you could walk in and not come out. She did not think about the river now. She thought about what Silas Drummond had told her, about what Hank had just confirmed, about a second man and a judge who knew, and a system that hanged one thief and let the other go free because the other one was useful. She thought about the truth. And she walked toward town with a purpose she had not felt in 4 years. It was midnight when she knocked on Judge Beaumont's door. The big house on the hill above the bank, white columns, green shutters, the finest house in Dusty Creek built on loans and leverage, and the kind of power that comes from holding everyone's debts in your desk drawer. A light came on in an upstairs window. Footsteps on the stairs. The door opened. Walter Beaumont stood in a nightshirt and slippers, his white hair uncombed, his face slack with surprise. He was 60 years old and looked every day of it. The power that had seemed so absolute for so long had worn grooves in his face. Mrs. Thornton. I know about Hank Coulter, Eliza said. And I think you know, too. Beaumont's face changed. Something closed behind his eyes. And then Eliza made a mistake. If you do not help me, she said, her voice shaking, I will tell everyone in this town that you signed the death warrant for a man whose accomplice you protected. I will tell them you sentenced Thomas to hang for stealing horses from your own stable while his partner walked free because you needed a spy. I will go to every newspaper in West Texas. I will destroy you. Beaumont's face went hard as granite. His hand moved to the door. He was going to shut it, shut her out, shut everything down. And in that moment, standing on the porch of the man who had killed her husband, Eliza heard her own words and recognized them. They were Rose's words, Rose's tactics, manipulation through fear, threats and leverage, and the wielding of information like a weapon. She had become the thing she hated most. Wait, she said. Beaumont paused. The door half closed. I am sorry. That was wrong of me. I am not here to threaten you. Then what do you want? I want to tell you the truth, and I think you already know it. Silence. A cricket chirped somewhere in the darkness. A dog barked in town below. Beaumont opened the door wider. They sat in his study, books on every wall, a desk the size of a coffin, oil lamp burning low. He poured himself a whiskey and did not offer her one. I knew Hank Coulter was there that night, Beaumont said. He spoke like a man pulling a nail out of his own hand, slow, painful, deliberate. I chose not to investigate further. Thomas Thornton's confession was enough for a conviction. Adding a second defendant would have complicated the case and drawn attention to the fact that the horses belonged to me, and I was the presiding judge. Conflict of interest. You let my husband hang because it was convenient. I let the law do its work. Your law, Judge. You were the law. Beaumont drank his whiskey. His hand was shaking. After Thomas was hanged, I made an arrangement with Coulter. He would work for Mercer and keep me informed about Mercer's operations. Mercer's ranch was growing. His cattle were competing with interests I had invested in. I needed eyes inside his operation. You turned my husband's killer into your spy. Your husband was not killed by Hank Coulter. He was killed by the law you controlled. Beaumont set down his glass. He looked at her for the first time since she had sat down. Really looked. What do you want from me, Mrs. Thornton? I want the case file, the original sheriff's report, the one that was sealed after the trial. He did not help her, not exactly. But when she stood and walked to the cabinet behind his desk, the one she had seen him glance at twice during their conversation, he did not stop her. He sat in his chair and stared at his whiskey glass and said nothing while she pulled out the file and tucked it under her arm. That was his version of atonement. Passive. Cowardly. But enough. At the study door she turned. Your daughter Rose. She has been paying Hank to steal Caleb's cattle. I expect you know that too. Something broke in Beaumont's face. A fracture line running through the stone. Go, he said, before I change my mind. Eliza walked out of the Beaumont house with the case file pressed against her chest. She stood on the hill and looked south toward the dark, empty miles between Dusty Creek and El Paso. 40 miles of desert, no horse, no money, shoes that were already falling apart. She needed Silas Drummond. She needed his testimony. She needed him to come back to Dusty Creek and face the man who had wronged him. She started walking. The ranch had never been this quiet. Caleb hated quiet. It sounded like the silence before artillery. 3 days since Eliza left. 3 days of going through the motions. Feeding cattle, fixing fences, riding the South Ridge, checking water levels. All the rituals of control that usually held him together. They were not working. He had turned Hank over to Sheriff Dawson. Told the sheriff what Hank had confessed about the cattle theft. Dawson took Hank into custody with the enthusiasm of a man picking up a dead skunk. He did not ask questions about Thomas Thornton or Judge Beaumont. He did not want to know. Caleb reorganized the hands, split the watch rotation, tallied the cattle losses. 43 head over the past months. At $12 a head, that was over $500 stolen from him by a man he had trusted. A man he had defended when others had raised questions. A man he had chosen to believe over Silas Drummond 2 years ago. Silas Drummond. 2 years ago, cattle had started going missing. Hank had come to Caleb with evidence pointing to Drummond. Boot prints. A bill of sale with Drummond's name on it. Caleb had not even questioned it. He had fired Silas on the spot. Told him to clear out before sundown or face the sheriff. Silas had protested. Had sworn he was innocent. Had begged Caleb to investigate. Caleb had not listened. The same way the town had not listened to Eliza. He was working on the corral fence on the second afternoon when he stopped mid-swing with the hammer and just stood there. The realization hit him like a mule kick to the chest. He had done to Silas Drummond exactly what Dusty Creek had done to Eliza Thornton. Decided he was guilty. Refused to look deeper. Thrown him away because it was easier than finding the truth. He put down the hammer. Went to check on the wild Mustang mare. She was gone. The Mustang had been in the far corral for 2 weeks, a beautiful animal. Dun-colored with a black mane, caught wild on the South Range. Caleb had been trying to break her the way he tried to break everything, with persistence and patience and the firm belief that if he just maintained control long enough, she would submit. She had broken through the fence in the night and run. The rails were splintered. Her tracks led south into open country. She was gone, and she was not coming back. Caleb stood in front of the empty corral with his hands on the broken top rail and stared at nothing. Billy came around the corner of the barn. The boy stopped when he saw Caleb. Froze. Because Caleb Mercer was standing in the middle of his ranch in the middle of the afternoon, and he was crying. Not sobbing. Not making a sound. Just tears running down his weathered face into his beard. Tears for a horse. Tears for a woman. Tears for 23 men in a fire and a boy named Jesse, and a life spent controlling everything and losing it all anyway. Billy did not speak. He sat down on a hay bale 10 feet away and started cleaning his saddle, slow, methodical, giving Caleb the fiction of privacy while staying close enough to matter. Neither of them mentioned it afterward, but it was the moment Caleb Mercer lost control for the first time in 20 years. And the world did not end. That evening, Tomas found him on the porch. The older man sat down in the other chair without asking, poured himself coffee from the pot on the rail. Patron. You sent her away because she kept a secret. That is right. But you keep secrets too. You have never told anyone about Jesse. Caleb's hand tightened on his cup. That is different. It is the same thing. Shame. Silence. Long enough for the coyotes to start up on the eastern ridge. She kept the truth about her husband because she was ashamed of what she did not do, Tomas said. You keep the truth about the fire because you are ashamed of what you chose. Same poison. Different bottle. Caleb did not answer, but he heard it. And he knew Tomas was right. The next morning, Caleb rode to Fort Davis. It was a full day's ride west. The fort sat on the edge of the Davis Mountains, a collection of stone and adobe buildings laid out in military order. Caleb had not been to a military post in 20 years. The sight of uniforms made his skin crawl, but he needed something, and this was the only place to get it. He found the post clerk in a cramped office stacked with filing cabinets. A thin man with spectacles and ink-stained fingers who looked like he had been born behind a desk. I am looking for records from a Union prison camp near Indianapolis, winter of 1864. There was a fire. 23 men died. The clerk looked at him over his spectacles. That would be Camp Morton. We have some records from the Prisoner Exchange Commission. What specifically are you looking for? A casualty report, cause of death for the men who died in the fire. It took the clerk 3 hours of digging through dusty files. Caleb sat on a wooden bench in the hallway and waited. He had waited 20 years. 3 more hours was nothing. The clerk came back with a single sheet of paper, yellow with age, handwritten by a surgeon whose penmanship was barely legible. Caleb read it twice. Deaths attributed to smoke inhalation prior to flame exposure in the majority of casualties. Examination of remains consistent with loss of consciousness from smoke before fire contact. He read the individual entries, found Jesse Colt's name, private, aged 17, cause of death, smoke inhalation. Jesse had been dead before the fire reached him. The smoke killed him, not the flames, not the beam that pinned his legs. The smoke filled his lungs and stopped his heart before the fire ever got close. Caleb could not have saved Jesse, even if he had chosen differently. Even if he had pulled Jesse out instead of Harwell. Jesse was already dead. This did not forgive Caleb. He had still chosen. He had still left a boy screaming in a burning building. But the question that had haunted him for 20 years, the what if that had driven him to build walls around himself so thick that no one could get through, the guilt that made him push away every person who tried to depend on him, that question had an answer now. And the answer was that it would not have mattered. He rode home in the dark. For the first time in 20 years, when he closed his eyes, Jesse Colt's face did not appear. He got back to the ranch at dusk. Tomas met him at the gate. Rider coming from the south. Caleb looked. A single figure on horseback, moving slow. No hurry. Not Eliza. Silas Drummond. Caleb's hand went to the rifle in his saddle scabbard. Tomas put a hand on his arm. Wait. Silas rode up to the gate. He looked older than Caleb remembered. Thinner. Harder. 2 years of bitterness had carved lines into his face that had not been there before, but his hands were empty. No gun. No weapon. He held up an envelope. I did not come here to kill you, Drummond said. His voice was hoarse. Tired. The voice of a man who's been angry for so long that the anger is burned down to ash. I came because someone told me you deserved to see the truth. Caleb took the envelope. Inside were bills of sale for stolen cattle, each one bearing Hank Coulter's signature, and a letter, written in a woman's hand on perfumed paper, addressed to a cattle buyer in Piedras Negras across the Mexican border. The letter confirmed an arrangement for the sale of Mercer cattle. It was signed by Rosalind Beaumont. Who told you I deserved the truth? Caleb asked. The widow. Drummond looked at him steady. She walked to El Paso and found me in a cantina 3 days ago, showed me the evidence from Beaumont's own files, told me I had been framed, told me Hank Coulter planted the evidence you used to fire me. Caleb stared at the papers in his hand. She walked to El Paso, he said. Yes, sir, 40 miles, on foot. Her shoes did not make it past Pecos. Eliza had walked 40 miles in 3 days, and her shoes fell apart at mile 30. The desert between Dusty Creek and El Paso was not the kind of country that forgave weakness. Cracked earth that blistered under the sun. Creosote bushes that smelled like medicine and offered no shade. The air so hot it shimmered above the ground like water that was not there. She hitched a ride on an ox cart for the first 10 miles. An old Mexican man hauling salt. He did not ask questions. He gave her a drink of water and let her ride in the back among the salt blocks. When he turned north toward the mines, she climbed down and walked. She had Beaumont's case file under her arm. The pages were already curling in the heat. She held them against her body and kept moving. She walked through the afternoon. She walked through the night. She slept for 3 hours in a dry creek bed with the file under her head like a pillow. The stars wheeling overhead and coyotes calling from the ridgeline so close she could hear their breath between the howls. She drank from a cattle trough on the second morning. Muddy water that tasted like rust and cow. She drank until her stomach cramped. Then she walked. Her shoes gave out past Pecos. The soles separated from the uppers. She tried to tie them together with strips torn from her skirt, but the leather was too far gone. She kicked them off and walked barefoot. The ground was hot enough to cook on. She could feel blisters forming with every step. She did not stop. In El Paso, she sat in the shade of a livery stable and read the case file completely for the first time. The sheriff's original report, 4 pages of cramped handwriting. She read it twice, then a third time because what she found changed everything. 2 sets of boot prints at the Beaumont stable on the night of the theft. The report noted them clearly. Two men entered. One set of prints matched boots found in Thomas Thornton's house. The second set was never identified. The investigation was closed after Thomas's arrest. The second set of prints was never pursued. Nobody even asked about them. But there was more. The dates on Rose Beaumont's letter to the cattle buyer in Piedras Negras. Eliza compared them to the dates of Caleb's cattle losses. The thefts from Caleb's ranch had been happening for over 2 years, overlapping with the period when Silas Drummond was still employed there. Hank was stealing cattle while Silas worked beside him. When Caleb noticed the losses, Hank planted evidence pointing to Silas. Caleb fired an innocent man on the word of the guilty one. The same system, the same machine, grinding up one person to protect another. Thomas, Eliza, Silas, all of them chewed up and spat out by people with power and no conscience. She found Silas in a cantina on the south side of El Paso, a dirt floor establishment that smelled like spilled mezcal and broken promises. He was sitting alone at a table in the back, a bottle in front of him, his face the color of old leather. He recognized her when she walked in, the cursed widow from Dusty Creek. Everybody knew her face, even if they did not know her name. "What are you doing here?" he said. She put the case file on the table, opened it to the page with the boot prints, opened Rose's letter, laid it all out. "You were framed," she said. "Hank Coulter was stealing Caleb's cattle and blaming you. These dates prove it. And Judge Beaumont was protecting Hank because Hank was his spy inside the ranch." Silas stared at the papers. His hand was shaking. "You walked here from Dusty Creek." "Yes, to clear my name. I walked here to clear the truth. Your name comes with it." Silas looked at her for a long time. Then he looked at the bottle. Then he pushed the bottle away. "What do you need from me?" "I need you to ride back with me. I need you to face Caleb Mercer and show him what really happened. Not for revenge, for justice. You want me to ride 400 miles back to the man who ruined my life and ask him to apologize. I want you to ride 40 miles back to the man who made a mistake and give him the chance to make it right." Silas rubbed his face with both hands. "Lady," he said, "you are either the bravest woman I have ever met or the craziest. Probably both. Are you coming or not?" He came. They rode back together, Silas on his horse, Eliza walking. He offered to let her ride double, but she shook her head. She had walked this far. She would walk the rest. On the second day, they reached the Pecos River. It was shallow here, barely waist deep, spread wide across a sandy bottom, brown water moving slow in the July heat. Eliza stood on the bank and looked at it. 4 years ago, she had stood at another river, the deep part of Dusty Creek south of town, the part where the current was strong. She had stood there for an hour, feeling the pull of the water, the promise of it, the simple mathematics of it. Walk in, do not stop, the suffering ends. She had not walked in, stubbornness mostly, did not want to give them the satisfaction. Now she stood at another river. Same posture, same exhaustion. But everything else was different. She stepped into the water and waded across. She did not think about what it meant. She did not narrate it to herself. She just crossed. Silas watched from his horse. He did not say anything. Some things do not need words. They reached the ranch at dusk. Eliza's feet were blistered and bleeding. Her dress was torn at the hem from 3 days of cactus and mesquite thorns. Her face was burned from the sun and her lips were cracked and her body was running on nothing but willpower and the bitter satisfaction of having done the thing she should have done 4 years ago. Caleb was standing at the gate. Not inside the gate. At the gate, like he had been waiting. Silas was beside him. They had already talked. Eliza could see it in Caleb's face, the way the rigid control had cracked in a new place, a deeper place. "You went to El Paso," Caleb said. His voice was strange, rough, like something heavy was sitting on his chest. Alone, barefoot. Shoes gave out past Pecos. "You could have died." "But I did not. This time I acted instead of staying quiet." He looked at her. She looked at him. The sun was going down behind the hills, and the light was the color of honey, and everything was very still. He did not apologize in words. Caleb Mercer was not a man who apologized in words. Instead, he turned and walked toward the main house, held the door open for her. Inside, on the table, a hot meal, stew and biscuits and strong coffee, a basin of warm water with a clean cloth, and beside the basin, a pair of new boots, women's size, brown leather, good quality. Thomas stood in the kitchen corner stirring a pot, not looking at anyone. But he was smiling. Eliza sat down at the table. She looked at the food, she looked at the boots. She looked at Caleb standing in the doorway with his hat in his hands and his scarred arm visible below the rolled-up sleeve and his face carrying an expression she had never seen on him before. It was not love, not yet. It was something harder to name. The look of a man who has been shown what he is and decided to become something else. She ate. For the first time in 4 years, she ate until she was full. That night, a fire erupted in the horse barn. Eliza woke to the sound of horses screaming. She ran to the window and saw orange light dancing on the walls. Caleb was already on his feet, pulling on his boots. They ran outside together. The barn was burning on the south side. Not an accident. The fire had started in 3 places at once, along the base of the wall where kindling and kerosene had been stacked deliberately. Tomas had already gotten the horses out. He and Billy and Pete were leading the last animals away from the flames, while Dan and Tom hauled water from the trough. A note was pinned to the fence post nearest the gate. Eliza pulled it down and read it in the firelight. Last warning. R.B. Rose. She knew about the evidence. She knew Eliza had been to El Paso. She knew the walls were closing in, and she was burning everything she could reach before they reached her. Caleb stood in front of the burning barn. The fire reflected in his eyes, orange and red and yellow and terrible. His whole body went rigid. His hands clenched at his sides. His breathing changed, fast, shallow. Not here. Eliza had seen this before. Not in Caleb, in her mother's patients. Men who came back from the war and the border conflicts with wounds you could not see. Wounds that lived in the mind and came alive when the world echoed the thing that had broken them. He was not in Texas. He was in the prison camp. He was watching 23 men die. She took his hand, the scarred one, the left one, the one that had pulled Lieutenant Harwell from the fire and reached for Jesse Colt and could not hold on. She held it tight. Caleb, the horses are out. Thomas got them out. The barn is just wood. Look at me. He did not look at her. His eyes were fixed on the fire. Caleb, look at me. He looked. For 1 second his eyes were wild and empty and 20 years old. Then they cleared. He was here. He was present. The fire was a barn, not a prison camp. The screaming was horses, not men. She did not let go of his hand. "We ride to town at dawn," Caleb said. His voice was steady now. Together. Together. Caleb Mercer had not fired a gun at a living soul in 20 years. Every morning he prayed he would never have to again. This morning he stopped praying. They rode into Dusty Creek at 9 in the morning. Caleb in front on his chestnut gelding, his arms still stiff from being gripped too hard, but he did not mind that. Eliza beside him on Copper, the mare she had healed, the one that now followed her like a dog. Behind them came Thomas and Silas and Billy and Pete and Dan. 8 riders, all armed, backs straight, making a statement. The whole town stopped. People came out of stores and houses and the saloon and stood on the boardwalk and stared. The cursed widow of Dusty Creek was riding next to Caleb Mercer on one of his horses, and behind them came every cowboy on his payroll. Caleb went to the sheriff first. Tom Dawson was sitting behind his desk with his feet up and a cup of coffee in his hand. He saw Caleb coming through the door and put his feet down. "Mercer, heard you had some trouble out at your place. I am filing charges against Rosalind Beaumont for conspiracy to commit cattle theft, arson of my horse barn, and hiring armed men to threaten my property. I have evidence. Bills of sale with Hank Coulter's signature. A letter in Rose Beaumont's hand confirming an arrangement to sell stolen cattle across the border, and the case file from Thomas Thornton's trial showing that evidence was suppressed by Judge Beaumont. Dawson looked at the papers Caleb laid on his desk. He looked at them for a long time. "I do not see enough here to act on," Dawson said. Caleb had expected this. Dawson was Beaumont's man, had been for 15 years. The sheriff's badge might as well have the bank's name engraved on it. "Fine," Caleb said. He gathered the papers. "Then we will let the town decide." He walked out of the sheriff's office and crossed Main Street to the open ground in front of the courthouse, the town square such as it was. A dirt patch with a flagpole and a horse trough, and enough room for a crowd to gather. Caleb stood in the center. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. When the biggest rancher in West Texas stands in the middle of town with a stack of papers and 6 armed men behind him, people listen. He read the evidence aloud. The bills of sale. Hank Coulter's signature on every one. Cattle stolen from the Mercer Ranch and sold across the border at Piedras Negras. Rose Beaumont's letter confirming the arrangement, instructing the buyer on pickup times and quantities. Then the case file. The sheriff's original report from Thomas Thornton's trial. 2 sets of boot prints at the Beaumont stable. Only 1 man arrested. Only 1 man hanged. The crowd grew. People came from every direction. Harold Finch stood in his store doorway, white as his own flower. Mrs. Crawford held her hand over her mouth. The 12-year-old boy who had thrown rocks at Eliza stood between his parents and did not look at anyone. Then an old woman stood up from the back of the crowd. Matilda Grove, 72 years old, the town's midwife for 40 years. She had delivered half the people standing in that square. She walked to the front with a cane and a straight back, and a face that said she was done being afraid. "I have something to say," she announced, "and I should have said it 4 years ago." The crowd went silent. "Thomas Thornton came to see me 2 weeks before he stole those horses. He asked me how to tell if a woman was carrying a child. He believed his wife Eliza was pregnant. He was wrong about that. But he did not know it." Matilda's voice carried across the square like a church bell. Thomas was in debt. Not gambling debt, not drinking debt, medical debt. Eliza's mother was dying. The curandera could not heal herself. Thomas had borrowed money from Judge Beaumont's bank to pay for a doctor from San Antonio. The loan was in default. Beaumont could have forgiven it. Instead, he let it stand. She paused. Let the words settle. Thomas Thornton stole those horses to pay off a loan at Judge Beaumont's bank. He stole from a man to repay a debt he owed to that same man, and that man sentenced him to death for it. The crowd erupted, shouts, questions, accusations. The noise rose like a wave. Eliza stood in the square, and for the first time in 4 years, the people of Dusty Creek were looking at her, really looking, not at the curse, not at the shame, at the woman. A long moment of silence. Wind died, dust settled. A fly buzzed in the still air. Then Rose Beaumont arrived. She came from the direction of the bank, and she was not alone. 3 men rode with her. Hard-looking men on hard-used horses. Border drifters, hired guns. The kind of men you could find in any cantina between here and the Rio Grande if you had enough money and few enough scruples. Rose herself looked like she had not slept. Her golden hair was loose, her dress was wrinkled, her face was wild in a way Eliza had never seen. This was not the Rose who delivered cruelty with a smile. This was a woman who had run out of options and was reaching for the only thing she had left. "This is lies," Rose shouted. "All of it. This woman is cursed, and she has poisoned Caleb Mercer's mind, and now she is trying to destroy my family with forged documents and bought testimony." One of the hired men reached for his pistol. Everything happened fast. Pete drew first. The shot cracked across the square, and the hired man jerked backward off his horse and hit the ground. The second man spun toward Pete. Tomas shoved Billy behind the water trough and raised his own rifle. But Billy did not stay behind the trough. He rolled clear and came up behind the second gunman and tackled him from the saddle. They went down hard in the dust. Billy was young and strong and furious. He pinned the man's gun hand and slammed it against the ground until the pistol came loose. Caleb saw it happen. For one frozen second, he saw Jesse Colt, 17 years old, face full of terror, under the beam, screaming. But this time, the boy survived. Billy stood up, breathing hard, dusty, alive. Something released in Caleb's chest, a knot that had been tied for 20 years. The third gunman came at Caleb. Caleb did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He dropped his rifle. He took the man down with his hands, caught the gun arm, twisted, drove his shoulder into the man's chest. They went down in the dirt. The man pulled a knife. Caleb caught the blade on his forearm and felt it slice through his shirt and into the meat above his wrist. He did not stop. He drove his fist into the man's jaw twice, and the man went limp. Caleb stood up. His side was bleeding from the knife wound. Not deep, but bleeding freely. He stood in the middle of the town square with blood running down his hand, and he did not reach for his gun. He had promised himself 20 years ago that he was done killing. Eliza was there. She was always there when someone was bleeding. She knelt beside him and pressed her hands against the wound. Firm. Steady. Those hands that knew how to keep things alive. The whole town watched. The cursed widow of Dusty Creek on her knees in the dirt, holding together the man they all respected. Her hands red with his blood. Her face calm. Her voice steady. Hold still. It is not deep, but I need to stop the bleeding. Press here. Do not move. Judge Walter Beaumont walked out of the bank. He stood on the steps and looked at the square, at the evidence scattered on the ground, at his daughter standing rigid with shock, at Eliza's hands on Caleb's wound, at the 3 hired men on the ground, 1 dead, 2 subdued. He looked at it all for a long time. Then he walked down the steps. "Sheriff Dawson, arrest my daughter." The words fell like stones into deep water. Rose turned to her father. Her face was white. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. "Father, arrest her for conspiracy to commit cattle theft, conspiracy to commit arson, and hiring armed men to threaten violence against citizens of this town." The sheriff did not move. "Now, Tom." Beaumont's voice was iron. Dawson moved. Rose did not scream. She did not cry. She stood perfectly still as the sheriff put the handcuffs on her wrists, and she looked at her father, and her face said everything. "You chose your honor over me, the one thing I feared most." Then Beaumont faced the crowd. "I knew about Hank Coulter. I knew there were 2 men at my stable that night. I chose not to investigate because a single conviction was cleaner, simpler. Thomas Thornton was in debt to my bank. He stole my horses to repay that debt. I could have forgiven the loan. I did not. And then I sentenced him to death for trying to pay what he owed me." He reached up and removed the pin from his lapel. The Justice of the Peace insignia. He set it on the courthouse steps. "I resign my office, effective immediately." He walked back into the bank and closed the door. Rose was taken to the county jail to await trial. She went quietly. The hired men were rounded up. The crowd stood in the square and the dust settled, and the world was different than it had been an hour ago. Silas Drummond stepped in front of Caleb. "You owe me 2 years of my life, I know it. I do not want money. I want a job. I want my name clean." Caleb looked at Eliza. She was still kneeling beside him, one hand pressed against the bandage on his side. She looked back, her gray-blue eyes steady. She nodded. "Monday," Caleb said. 5 in the morning, bring your own saddle." 6 months later, Eliza Mercer stood in front of the general store where she had once been afraid to speak, holding the key in her hand, and thought that life was the strangest thing God ever invented. The sign above the door was new, painted by Billy, who had more enthusiasm than talent. Mercer Mercantile and Apothecary. The letters were slightly crooked. Eliza did not mind. Crooked letters from a good heart were better than straight letters from a cold one. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. The smell hit her first. dried herbs and clean wood and something warm. She had redesigned the entire store. One side was the general mercantile, dry goods and ammunition and fabric and tools, all the things Harold Finch had sold for 30 years. The other side was hers. Rows of glass jars filled with chaparral root, sage, mesquite bark, prickly pear, and a dozen other remedies her mother had taught her. Salves and poultices and tinctures made by her own hands. Her mother's knowledge, her mother's legacy, living again. Harold had been glad to sell. He was tired and old and ready to sit on a porch somewhere and do nothing. Caleb bought the building. Eliza filled it. The wedding had been 3 months ago. Not a grand ceremony. On the main house porch at sunset. Just Thomas, Silas, Billy, and a handful of townsfolk. A circuit-riding preacher who had come through on Saturday and agreed to stay an extra day. Caleb wore his dark suit, the one he had not put on in 5 years. He stood at the porch railing with his left sleeve rolled up, the scars visible, the ridged, shiny, ugly scars that he had hidden under long sleeves for 20 years. He rolled the sleeve up and he did not roll it back down. He put the ring on Eliza's finger with his burned hand, and his hand did not shake. Eliza walked to the porch alone. No father, no brother, nobody to give her away. Billy stepped forward from the line of cowboys. His ears red, his voice cracking. Voice, reckon we all do. He gestured at the men behind him. She saved my calf. She saved the boss. Far as we are concerned, she is family, and family gives family away. Tomas, barely audible from the back. Ya era hora, patron, Billy cried during the ceremony and pretended he was not. Nobody called him on it. That was 3 months ago. Now Eliza ran a store and healed the sick and managed the books and tried to remember the last time she had been this tired and this happy at the same time. She had not forgotten the darkness. You do not forget 4 years of starvation and stones and silence. But she had learned something her mother tried to teach her a long time ago, and she had been too young and too angry to hear. Healing is not the absence of wounds. Healing is the decision to keep going despite them. Silas Drummond worked the ranch alongside Thomas. They had hated each other on sight, which Eliza found amusing and Caleb found exhausting. Thomas thought Silas was reckless. Silas thought Thomas was old. They argued about everything from fence placement to the proper way to brand a calf. They also, without either of them admitting it, trusted each other absolutely. Caleb said it was like having 2 wives. Eliza told him he was lucky to have one. Billy was courting the baker's daughter, a sweet girl named Lucy, who made sourdough bread that could make a man weep. Billy came to Eliza for advice on a Tuesday afternoon, turning his hat in his hands and looking like he was facing a firing squad. Just talk to her, Billy. About what? About anything. Ask her about her bread. What if she thinks I only like her for her bread? Billy. Everyone likes her for her bread. Rose Beaumont was tried in the district court in October. The trial lasted 2 days. She was convicted of conspiracy to commit cattle theft and arson and sentenced to 3 years in the state penitentiary at Huntsville. Eliza did not attend the trial. She did not need to. She said one thing about it to Caleb on the night the verdict came in. I hope she finds something good in there. But that is not my weight to carry anymore. Judge Beaumont closed the bank. He opened a small law office on the south end of town and began taking cases for free, representing the people he had spent 30 years ignoring. Widows with land disputes, Mexican families with water rights claims, men accused of things they did not do. He was not a hero. He was a guilty man spending his last years trying to pay a debt that could never be fully paid. He would die in 2 years and be buried without ceremony. That was appropriate. On a cool evening in November, Eliza walked out to the small plot behind the Dusty Creek Church where they buried the people nobody claimed. Thomas's grave had been neglected for 4 years. The wooden marker was rotting. The ground was overgrown with weeds. Nobody had visited. Nobody had cared. Eliza had cleaned it up over the past months. Replaced the marker with a proper one, carved from cedar, pulled the weeds, planted sage around the base the way her mother would have wanted. She knelt in the dirt and sat with him. She did not speak aloud. She did not need to. The conversation was internal, and it was simple, and it was the conversation she had needed to have for 4 years. You were a fool, Thomas, but you were a fool who loved me. You died trying to save my mother. You died because you believed I was carrying your child. You carried those secrets to the gallows so I would not carry them. I forgive you. I forgive me. She touched the marker once, stood up, walked away. She did not look back. This was not abandonment. This was release. That evening she found Caleb on the porch. He was sitting in his chair, coffee in hand, watching the sun go down behind the western ridge. The ranch spread out below them, the rebuilt barn, bigger than before, the cattle on the far hills, the fence lines running straight to the horizon, the bunkhouse where Silas and Tomas were probably arguing about something. She sat down beside him. Caleb. I am carrying. Silence. Long silence. The kind of silence that fills up with everything two people are feeling but cannot put into words. Then his scarred hand found hers and tightened. Boy or girl? How would I know? I want a girl. Stubborn like her mother. Careful what you pray for, cowboy. He laughed. A rusty sound like a gate hinge that has not been opened in years. She laughed with him, and that was enough for now. The next morning, Eliza woke before dawn. Caleb was still sleeping. She could hear his breathing, slow and deep, the breathing of a man who no longer dreads the night. He had not had a nightmare in 2 months. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and walked to the porch. The ranch spread out in the gray pre-dawn light, cool air on her face, the smell of sage and dust and the sweet particular smell of cattle on a cold morning. She heard hoofbeats, soft, hesitant. She looked toward the south gate, the wild Mustang mare. Dun-colored black mane, the one that had broken through the corral fence 3 months ago and run into open country. The one Caleb had tried to break with patience and persistence, and the firm belief that if he just maintained control long enough, she would submit. She had not submitted. She had left. Now she stood outside the gate, ears forward, nostrils flaring, not inside the fence, watching. Eliza walked to the gate, slow, quiet. She did not pick up a rope. She did not whistle. She did not do any of the things that people do when they want to capture a wild thing. She opened the gate. Then she turned and walked back toward the house. The mare stood for a long while, ears forward, nostrils working at the scent of hay and water, and something she did not have a name for. The smell of a place where damaged things were allowed to heal. Then she stepped through the gate, on her own, at her own pace, the way all wild things do when someone is patient enough to open the door and ask for nothing in return. Eliza Mercer poured 2 cups of coffee, sat on the porch, waited for her husband to wake up. The sun broke over the eastern ridge and flooded the valley with light. The sky turned from gray to gold, to the deep, clear blue that only exists in West Texas in the early morning when the world is new. She did not think about tomorrow. She did not calculate the days or count the pennies or measure the distance to the next disaster. For the first time in longer than she could remember, the arithmetic in her head was quiet. She was here. And here was enough. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.